Thank you for coming. We're involved in new technology this morning, or at least new for us. This event is being live streamed on nj.com. It's also being broadcast into several rooms here at the Eagleton Institute of Politics. So there are people in several rooms watching this on TV. And when we get to question and answer period, we'll try to get a microphone to those rooms as well as in here. And we'll ask then that you say your name before asking a question, so that because this will be on camera for all who are watching. My name is John Weingart. I'm the Associate Director of the Eagleton Institute of Politics. We have a number of other programs here coming up. I just wanted to mention next week, November 13th, Raheem Salim of the National Review magazine will be here talking about the state of the Republican Party. Olympia Snow, former senator from the state of Maine, will be here on November 21st talking, her topic is Fighting for Common Ground, How We Can Fix the Stalemate in Congress. And that event will be at the Douglas Campus Center just across the lawn. We will have a program on the politics and players of immigration reform with Frank Shari and Sayu Bojwani also in December. And Ken Walsh, a political scientist, written a new book called The Isolation of American Presidents and the Crisis of Leadership, and he will be giving a talk on December 5th. And finally, Chris Matthews will be giving a talk on December 9th at 7:30 at the Douglas Campus Center. And you can find information about all these events at the Eagleton Institute website and register for them if you'd like to come. We have a number of, everyone here is a distinguished guest. Several I will mention are Dan Benson, just re-elected to the Assembly last night, is going to be here. I'm not sure if he is here yet. And Ed Traska, the mayor of Montgomery Township, I think will be here. Bill Hamilton, former Speaker of the State Assembly, and Greta Kiernan, former member of the State Assembly, are both here, and we're delighted everyone is here. I just want to say one thing to start. We have a poll, quiz we do before each election of faculty and staff and students and alumni to guess the outcome of the election. And we had two bonus questions or tiebreaker questions on the one we did yesterday in case everybody got everything else right, and to separate who was the winner and who came in second. And one of the questions was who will win by a larger margin, the mayor of New York or the governor of New Jersey? So the answer, as you can see by the placing of the headline, is the mayor. De Blasio gets a higher line on it. And the second question was, in what paragraph in the New York Times story about the governor's race will the word presidential first appear? And the answer is the first. So we have a distinguished panel here of two former governors. 20 years ago today, Christie Whitman was celebrating having just been elected governor. 16 years ago, she was celebrating having just been re-elected governor over Jim McGreevey. 12 years ago, Jim McGreevey...
Oh, that's forgotten.
12 years ago, Jim McGreevey was celebrating having been elected governor, and we're delighted they joined us here this morning. I want to begin with comments from the two members of the press who are here, and then turn to the two governors, and start with Darryl Isherwood, who is now the political correspondent for NJ.com. Thanks.
Thank you. So we had a somewhat, I guess you can call it, historic race last night. The governor won by, I think the final margin was about 22 points. It was sort of an anticlimactic race. You know, all the polls showed him up big throughout. It never sort of changed. It went, you know, it fluctuated between, I think the low was maybe 18 points, and you had some polls showing as much as 36. And it never really moved much. And that started that way, you know, almost from the beginning, and it kind of continues. So there really weren't any surprises in terms of the gubernatorial race last night. As John said, the big story on Chris Christie is what's next for him. He won obviously a convincing win last night. Where does he go from here? Everybody speculates he's running for president in 2016. I don't think that's a secret to anybody who has followed him. He obviously hasn't announced, you know, a couple of years away, but he's positioning himself already, and you can bet, you know, his team started, if they didn't start this morning, they started, you know, 2 weeks ago trying to position him in the right place. So, I mean, that's the big news for Christie. Obviously, the re-election is big, but his next step is what everybody's going to be watching. A couple of surprises in the legislature, or really one big surprise in the legislature, to my mind, is that no Senate seats turned over. Democrats kept control of all 24 Senate seats that they had. And when you got a guy at the top of the ticket who wins by 22, you expect him to drag other members, other Republicans into office, and he just didn't. I just got the final, or it's not final yet, but it looks like they've definitely picked up, Republicans have picked up one assembly seat, potentially two, one in South Jersey in District 1 and one in North Jersey in District 38. The District 38, I'm told, is still contested. So we could be looking at a one-seat pickup in the Assembly on a 22-point win. When the governor sitting next to me won big in his election bid, he dragged, how many? How many did you get in? I forget the number, but they took control of the Assembly with his
Be careful for what you wish.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not saying it's a good or bad thing, just that it's a surprising thing, right? So,
Yes.
you know, that's a surprise to me that he did not have coattails, and there are a number of explanations for it, depending on who you talk to. The one you hear fairly often is this is a Christie phenomenon, not a Republican phenomenon. New Jersey's still a blue state, but Christie sort of transcends that partisan label, that party label. You also had very strong candidates at the top of the ticket for these Democratic senators, these Democratic districts. You know, on paper it looks like you might drag in some, but then when you go district by district and look at who's actually running, you've got strong people up there, and they came through. And Democrats ran tough campaigns in all these districts. So to me, that's the main surprise that came out of yesterday. I think the margin is right. Christie's margin is sort of right where we expected it to be. I don't think realistically even his people thought they were going, 30, 40 points. I think they figured, somewhere where they were. So, it was an exciting race to an extent. You didn't have, the sort of the intrigue and the suspense that we all and people who do this for a living would like. But it's you're seeing history. You're seeing a guy from New Jersey who might one day be president. And that's fairly exciting for anybody who follows this stuff on a regular basis. So.
Okay, well, thanks. Kate Zernike is national correspondent for the New York Times.
Hi, thanks for having me here this morning. So all eyes on New Jersey, I think, is the story of the morning. When I first started out my career, I was in Massachusetts, and now that I've moved away, people would say, "Oh, Massachusetts is such a liberal state." And I would always think, yes, but it was, ruled by Republican governors for 16 years, and it's one of the most socially conservative places I've ever lived. It's, the rate of divorce is very low. I think it's the lowest in the country. And so I think sometimes people forget, they sort of look at a state from across the country and think, well, oh, it's this or that. And so the storyline is going to be Christie won big in blue New Jersey. Christie won by appealing, by partisanship and appealing to blacks and Hispanics and women. And I think that's all true to an extent. But I also think that, what I've come to see about New Jersey politics, and particularly in this race, is how transactional things are. And I think what the governor did so skillfully was starting from the morning after the election, when he went to the North Ward Center in Newark and saw Steve Adubato, he made clear that what he was going to do was make a point of reaching across to Democrats. He was going to reach out to black voters. He had black mayors and councilmen to drum thwack it, to pitch to them. In many ways, I think one of the reasons we didn't see a coattail effect is he didn't spend much time working for a Republican legislature. He really spent much more time reaching across the aisle to Democrats because he knew he wanted to bring them along, and that this was going to be the story of his presidential race. So I do think that that's something we need to remember. When I think about it, last night there was some confusion, and I think even if you watch CNN, there were, one minute they'd be describing Governor Christie as a moderate, the next minute they'd be describing him as the conservative Republican in blue New Jersey. I think really, again, it's much more sort of transactional. You have to look at what he's doing in each situation. It's interesting to me that today his first stop, much as 4 years ago his first stop was in Newark. Today his first stop, he's going back to Union City, where he was on Monday evening. And I think that's, again, I think we're going to see him really emphasizing and underscoring that he won the Hispanic vote, which is a striking win for a Republican governor. I guess looking at the race, it was, there wasn't any sort of big moment or excitement. I think if I, as a reporter who likes excitement, as Darryl said, I sort of wonder if we had a candidate who was a little more aggressive, a little more like, if you had Steve Lonigan running against Chris Christie, or the Democratic version of Steve Lonigan really sort of fighting having an event every day and calling reporters to his house and saying, I'm going to do a press conference on my porch. I sort of wonder what the dynamic would have been. I think probably the answer is that after Hurricane Christie, Hurricane Sandy, let's just call it that, shall we? After Hurricane Sandy, the cards were really set. So I'm not sure that anything would have changed it. But I think, if I had one wish for this campaign, it would have been for a somewhat more aggressive campaign against the governor, just to sort of challenge him on some points, just because I like to see people really duke it out. Anyway, that's my...
Governor Whitman, what are your thoughts?
Well, again, it's kind of all been touched on in that there were no huge surprises. I am not as surprised as you are by the legislative and the no coattails, precisely because of the individual candidates. And also, let's not forget that there was a conscious decision made by a lot of the big PACs, and particularly the unions, not to play in the governor's race because they had already decided the governor was going to win big. He was going to win, and it just wasn't worth spending their money there. And what they're doing, what they did in this state and what they've done in a number of the other states as well, is spend their money on the legislative races to hold those seats in order to be able to build for the future. And you see that as a trend that's happening more and more around the country. The same thing with the Chamber of Commerce for the Republican side. If you look at Alabama's first district race yesterday, that was something where the Chamber of Commerce came in and spent a lot of money and pulled out a moderate Republican, as it were, against a Tea Party Republican. This was a primary. And it was looked on by the pundits as being emblematic of what's going to happen to the Republican Party in the future. So that tells you that, in fact, there's a change in the way people are focusing their time and attention and where they want to get involved, because they do want the big prize at the end of the day. But they're seeing in this state anyway, they saw from early on, and even before Katrina, as you mentioned, Chris Christie had been doing a brilliant job of reaching out across the aisle and bringing people together. He'd run the table. And I also feel really sorry for Barbara Bono in the sense that she had no support from her party. I mean, when I ran for the Senate in 1990, I didn't have any support, but it wasn't like this. It wasn't where they were all running away, and not just not participating with her, but endorsing Chris Christie. And that's pretty tough when she has to run against her own party as well as the Republican candidate. So these things all tell me that Chris really does have a future, and particularly if people are looking from the Republican side of the aisle at the demographics of how he captured the women's vote, how he captured the minority vote. I mean, if we want to win as a party nationwide, we cannot ignore those constituencies. And then if you look down in Virginia, where you had Cuccinelli and McAuliffe, that was, people will say it was a closer race. It was supposed to be, again, symptomatic of where Republicans are going. We had a very weak candidate there, and the Democrats had what was referred to constantly as a bagman. And what everyone forgets in that race is there was a libertarian. And the polls show that the libertarian was pulling from the young voters who didn't like the idea of big money in politics. They were tired of money in politics, and they were taking it straight. That was going right at McAuliffe's base. So I think he would have won bigger. And then if you look at the breakdown of demographics of that, you will see Cuccinelli lost women. He lost minorities. He won big in the coal part of the state, in the southern part of the state, but not any bigger than previous Republican wins in that part of the state. So it's setting up all kinds of dynamics if Republicans really want to step back and say, okay, do we want to win the presidency in the future? My take would be, then you've got to take a good, hard look at somebody like a Chris Christie.
There's an old adage that said, obviously, in a sarcastic tone, that the quilt of the Democratic Party is brown and white and yellow and beige, and the Republican Party was white and off-white and very white. And I think when you heard, as Governor Whitman alluded to, the speech that Governor Christie gave last night, he was very deliberate, purposeful, and intentional about reaching out to the width and breadth of America. And it was refreshing for all of us, for many of us who are concerned about the importance of having two major national parties that represent the best interests of this country. It's problematic when many of us perceive the Republican Party being hijacked, if you will, by extremists. And I think, and Kate calls it transactional, I call it relationships. I think there was a wonderful congruence between policy and personality and politics that this governor appreciates. And I think what's interesting, what I find interesting is, below the horizon, below the television cameras, Governor Christie has a wonderful sincerity and outreach, and spends a lot of time cultivating relationships. And at the end of the day, whether it's trust or whether confidence that someone's going to follow through on a policy initiative that's important, that's what also drives politics. And so I think for many Democrats and independents and moderates, although they may have concerns with certain aspects of the governor's political thoughts, they saw a governor who could govern and was powerfully instrumental in bringing about the change that they yearned for. And so it was, perhaps as Darryl said, there was nothing wildly unpredictable about last night, which in itself is the most powerful statement. It was the ordinariness of a 22% victory that is stunning.
Before we all get consumed with the national implications of every move the governor makes, I wanted to ask you all what your thoughts are about governing in New Jersey for the next couple of years. In the governor's speech last night, he said there's going to be no change from the first term, and he said several times he was going to finish the job, which was distinctive because he wasn't finished the term necessarily, but finished the job. But what does that mean as an agenda, a legislative agenda, a gubernatorial agenda next year and the year after? The minimum wage issue, which was somewhat contentious over the last several years, is now settled with a voter referendum. The same-sex marriage issue is now settled as a result of a court decision. What are the issues that are going to be consuming the governor and the legislature in Trenton that you see coming up? Anybody?
I think one of the interesting things is going to be see how the Democrat legislature works with him this time, because they know he's, irrespective of anything else, he's going to be term limited out. So he's got a certain window in which he can accomplish new things. If he stayed for his full term, that runs out after about 3 years, and then you're just locking in your legacy. But they now are second-guessing themselves. Did they let him have too easy a slide? And the national Democrats want to bloody him up a little bit. They want to get a little traction because they see him as a real threat in the presidential. So it'll be very interesting to see whether the legislature, the Democrats in the legislature, work with him as closely as they have in the past and give him as many votes as they have. Now, they've stopped some things, and they've had their fights over the judicial nominations, and that's been, I think, a detriment to all of us, both sides fighting the way they have and leaving the vacancies on the court. But I think overall you're going to see a different kind of relationship, which is going to make it more of a challenge for him to accomplish what he wants to accomplish. And I think one of those things he wants to accomplish is some tax cuts, because that goes to his verifiables with the conservative wing of the party, and I think he wants that if he's going to think about national politics.
And I think, again, we're going to have a state Senate president who's running for governor already, right, which is going to be harder. He's worked with Steve Sweeney very closely, and I wonder if Sweeney's going to be as willing to do that. Two other things I would point out is, this Planned Parenthood issue, this funding women's health clinics, is going to come up again, and the governor's going to have an eye to Iowa when he makes that decision and pleasing the right wing of his party. And I also think the budget is going to be a huge issue. Again, if he wants to get tax cuts, he's got this promise that he's going to increase the pension payments, and those pension payments are really going to balloon. I think it's something like, in 3 years, it's going to be something like 40% of the state education budget is going to we can't steer it from the state education budget, obviously, but it's going to be that size. So that's going to be very difficult to do that and also accomplish tax cuts.
But I also think that there's opportunities to work together on higher education. No matter what, I think the dust is largely settled insofar as we have to accept the restructuring, and I would make an argument that there will ultimately be benefits from the restructuring, but I think restructuring of higher education is critical in the state of New Jersey, ensuring its competitiveness, particularly in those industries which are critically important: pharmaceutical, biotech, communication technologies, logistics. I think the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, and Governor Whitman perhaps knows this better than most, is the port services fully, almost a third of the U.S. population, is an important area where he has to work cooperatively with Governor Cuomo. And I also think transportation infrastructure. New Jersey has an aging transportation infrastructure. Anybody who traveled down Route 1 to get here this morning. And whether it's our bridges or tunnels, and the governor has made a significant investment, both working with federal partners, Senator Menendez and late Senator Frank Lautenberg. But I think that has to be important, because I think whether you're talking about a policy question, you're talking about a political base, at the end of the day, education and infrastructure are two critical, important issues. And lastly, something that I care about, prison reentry and drug treatment over incarceration. You know, if I can, these aren't exciting issues, and there's not a broad constituency. Most people coming out of state prison or federal prison aren't going to vote the next day. And I think the governor has assiduously worked to increase opportunities for treatment. And I think it's even startled some Democrats. But I think it's born out of a deep sense of conviction and personal commitment to the issue. And so I think the governor will continue to understand that addiction is something that crosses all boundaries, and understanding that we have a prison crisis in this country. And I know that's not the focus, but I think it's very interesting that Richard Viguerie writes a major piece, an op-ed piece in the New York Times, talking about how America prisons are broken, and Governor Christie is one Republican governor who's clearly speaking to the financial implications and the moral implications of that. I mean, parenthetically, last year was the first time in the history of the state of New York that more money was spent on public prisons than on public higher education. So that there is a policy context, as well as, I would argue, as a moral context. So there are opportunities to work together, perhaps.
You know, I would say also, both sides got a lot of mileage this election season out of this bipartisanship. You know, you saw, I mean, Christie, you know, it was bipartisanship was Chris Christie's motor vehicle insurance. You know, you saw him use it really well to his advantage during the government shutdown, but you saw it also on the Democratic side. You know, here you have these guys running in contested Democratic districts, and they're touting the fact that they voted for Chris Christie's budget and things like that. It's, you know, it was a twilight zone watching some of this stuff go on. And so both sides have gotten some mileage out of it, but I think it was Governor Whitman said, you know, they're going to be looking to bloody him up a little bit now. He's on a fast track at this point. And I think Democrats realize, whether it's state Democrats or national Democrats, that they can't just get out of his way and let him go. They've got to kind of, you know, present some hurdles for him. So you might see that change a little bit, but, you know, both sides have gotten a ton of mileage out of it. So I don't know that either side's willing to just give up on this bipartisan message and walk away.
It's a message that's worked for both sides.
Well, I would just hope that policy would take precedence over politics. But unfortunately, we haven't seen that. But that's why I'm more skeptical of the willingness to work together after this. I just think the stakes become so high on the presidential level that the pressure is going to be right back to what we see in Washington, which is total gridlock, because everything's that, what's it going to do for me? Is it going to get another vote in my caucus? Is it going to give me another percentage on my reelect? Not how can we solve this problem? And we've been lucky in these 4 years. It hasn't been luck. It's been really cultivating. The governor has gone out and worked hard at reaching those partisan barriers and gotten some things done. He's still got some challenges. I mean, they're going to look at him and say, you got to the unemployment rate. That's something that's got to come down, or they're going to really go after him on that. He's got some challenges, but I would hope that, to Governor McGreevey's point, that we look at the issues and the importance of the issues for the benefit and the good of the state, and not just the partisan politics. But unfortunately, I'm not terribly sanguine that that's going to happen when the stakes go up this high.
I also would raise one more, you know, as much as a lot of this was, I would say, largely about Governor Christie's personality and the sort of, he's got tremendous force of personality, but I also think when we talk about bloodying him up, I think they're going to be looking to pick fights with him in the hopes that he will, you know, wave an ice cream cone at someone or wag his finger at some more teachers. So I think that's also going to be an issue. And I think what was striking to me watching his speech, I thought his speech was entertaining and heartfelt, but I was just, I was sort of watching it with a split screen to Twitter, and I was just noticing all these sort of national political reporters. I felt it was very naturally Chris Christie. All these national political reporters were saying, wow, this is all me, which was the same thing that you heard at the convention was that, it was all me. He never mentioned Mitt Romney. So I was sort of struck by, well, wait, didn't they know that this is Chris Christie? So maybe we're about to learn. Maybe they're about to learn a little more.
And the other thing about what they're saying is, with this presidential race now hanging over New Jersey, that changes the dynamic in that everything the governor does will be looked at through that prism. So whether or not he's doing something for his 2016 run, we're all going to assume he is, and that's tough to do, because it's such a cynical eye that you look at things with and say, wow, he just did this Hispanic outreach because he's running for governor. Not, and he could very well care about whatever issue it is we're talking about, but we all immediately, as Kate was just saying, you sort of immediately jump to that cynicism about the politics of it because of this 2016 race hanging over us.
Governor Whitman, I want to ask you about the environment, particularly maybe energy too. We have at Eagleton a Center on the American Governor, and you look at all recent New Jersey governors, some major initiative in environmental protection has been a hallmark of the administration of yours, Governor McGreevey. And do you see an issue like that, an opportunity like that Christie could or should take advantage of?
I absolutely see the opportunity, and the opportunity is in the Sandy rebuild. The opportunity is adopting a state master plan now. He went through, at the very beginning of the administration, we had a governor's forum where he brought in all the cabinet. And it was the Governor's Institute, we call it, out of a center in Delaware, to talk about breaking down the silos, about everybody understanding that what transportation decides has a real impact on environment, has a real impact on housing, and vice versa, and all these things, that they're interrelated. Now what we have with Sandy is a real opportunity to look beyond 5 years, to look at the 15, 20, 30, 50, 100-year cycle, because the storms and the changes we're seeing are not going to go away. And it makes no sense really to just rebuild the way we have been. And they've already taken some steps. Their Department of Environmental Protection is working on some issues on the infrastructure, on the roads, on sanitary sewers, things like that. What we need to look at even harder, it's going to be difficult, is to look at how and where we're rebuilding. But if he were to step back and say, we have an opportunity to put New Jersey at the forefront of how you do this in a way that's smart, that allows for sustainable growth, meaning your children and grandchildren can live here. That's what sustainable means. Doesn't mean no growth. It means being able to continue to be where you are because you've done it in an intelligent way. I think he could make a real impact, because we haven't seen that, and of course with all the attention, whether or not it's for the presidential, but also because Sandy was such an enormous storm, that to bring everybody together and to really say this state is going to commit to thinking beyond the next 2 years or the next 5 years, we're going to be thinking the next generation, would set him apart from a lot of people.
And Governor McGreevey, I want to follow up on your comments about prison reentry. Besides his interest and sort of compassion in that direction, would that manifest itself in budgetary decisions, priorities?
Yeah,
or
I think that, John, I think the governor has, just anecdotally, I just wanted to share. I remember I was up in the Hudson County Courthouse, and it was the day on the front page of the New York Times, the governor had chided the Speaker of the U.S. House of Representatives. And I even winced to the degree, but only in Hudson County, a clerk of the court, who happens to be a Democratic County Committee person, I'm not quite sure how that happens, comes out and says, yeah, Christie! And I'm just like, and I was sort of stunned. But what struck me was that his willingness to take on his own party. And so that, interestingly enough, plays well into issues. And say, for example, whether it's on drug court or the expanding of drug court, something Governor Whitman had done, who's traditionally seen as a liberal Republican, Justice Porritz, the governor has said, we need to do this. So it's interesting, I don't want to overplay the Nixon to China metaphor, but in certain areas, particularly in terms of incarceration, clearly the governor has his bona fides as a former federal prosecutor, that he's been very aggressive in talking about treatment as the preferred option. And even going so far as to say treatment should be a mandatory option over incarceration. And that's been reflected in his budget, which is inures much to his credit. And if I can, I also don't want to leave the personal relationships. I was up, I was attending a wake Friday night up in a funeral home in Newark for someone. It's Friday, it's at 8 o'clock at night, and I pulled in and I sat down next to a friend, and she said, "Oh, bless you," she said, "the governor was just here." And it struck me that it's 8 o'clock at night, it's Friday, it's before the election, and the governor is here taking time away from his family, visiting someone who was proudly a partisan Democrat and paying that recognition to that person and to their family. And so I think, when we strafe across what's visible, I think it's so important to get under the hood, to mix metaphors here, and to look at what a tremendous sense of relationship the governor he does this so well, and I would argue with sincerity, and that carries the day in many cases.
And I think we're going to see the real importance of that as he takes over the chairmanship of the RGA, because
Yes.
that's really,
Don't forget
he'll
that.
have his power to make relationships and he'll have money.
Yeah, and Bill Clinton, and there's
Right.
a number of
You got
precedents.
36 governorships that are up
Yeah.
in the next year, 35, 36, and he's going to travel all over. He's going to be their #1 fundraiser. He's going to have lots of IOUs out there. And while he may have trouble in Iowa, I'm not sure after the last cycle how relevant Iowa's going to be anymore. I think a lot of people have said, "Oh, come on, the way they've set up their caucus system, the way they do, the candidates they've given us, this is just not going to have the same impact that it's had in the past." So I think it's a very different kind of playing field.
I also had someone make the point to me yesterday, I'm not sure if it's true, but someone was saying that they think that that the states that held their primaries later because of redistricting last time are actually going to push their primaries forward so that Iowa and New Hampshire won't have as much of an impact. That we're going to have, as we did in 2008, we'll have a lot more primaries earlier in the cycle, so other states will have more say in the presidential. And that those are larger, more populous states where Governor Christie's bipartisanship and relationship politics will work well.
And this is exciting also for all of you guys, for the state. As long as you all vote Democratic in 4 years, this is a great experiment.
Going back to Governor Whitman's point about Iowa, one of the things I found interesting was after the same-sex marriage decision, when the governor decided to pull out of the court case, you immediately saw some of the social conservatives from Iowa jump out on the national stage to chastise him for what he did. And it struck me as, when you talk to people who kind of know that presidential cycle, they were telling me, those guys aren't necessarily the players we're playing to, but yet they jumped out on that stage quick, and it's almost like they were trying to get that relevance, trying to grab that relevance early and say, that stuff's not going to play in Iowa, pal, but I think to Governor Whitman's point, I'm not sure, I don't know that he wins that state, and I don't know that it matters to him, and so I don't know that it benefits him or behooves him to try to play to that audience.
I think next year, in 2014, there are going to be not only all the governor's races, but a whole lot of Senate races. And he's going to have invitations to go campaign on behalf of almost all those people. And there's going to be a wide range of Republicans nationwide. And it's going to be interesting to watch how he chooses, which candidates he supports with, and what level of enthusiasm.
And can I just also parenthetically say that, Darryl and the press will look at, as Darryl freely said, everything in the context of 2016. But I think what the governor did in terms of not appealing the Supreme Court decision was significant. He clearly has a sense of principle, but there's also a pragmatic consideration as to the depth of the Supreme Court's decision, the soundness of his reasoning. And so, I think those decisions are perhaps not as important as policy decisions, but are strong indicators of how a person governs. And I think there can be a sense of gratitude and perhaps welcome relief that we don't have a person as chief executive making gratuitous rhetorical points at the expense of government.
I think it was a recognition of, as you point out, the unanimity of that court decision and the fruitlessness of carrying this on any further. And actually it was it was good for him. It gives him a little leeway. He can be both sides. He stood up and he said what he believed in, but I didn't pursue it, which I could have done as a governor. So he can say to the moderates, I didn't go after it, I didn't beat it the way the conservatives really wanted me to, and he could say to the conservatives, look, I did everything that I could. The Supreme Court decision was unanimous, and I wasn't going to waste any more taxpayers' money fighting it. So it's a...
Right, again, it's not moderate or conservative, it's pragmatic, right?
But that's what we should be looking at.
Exactly,
I mean, these titles of putting people in boxes, whether they're conservative or not, what we want, at least what I want, is a thinking person. And a thinking person means that they're going to look at each issue individually, and they're going to be conservative on some, moderate on others, and liberal on another set. And that's what you want. Putting them in a box, which we do because it's easy, and it's easier to label people and to hold them up against a certain standard. I just think we ought to be looking for people who are kind of all over the place simply because they have principles, but they apply them individually depending on the issues in front of them.
I think that's what's made Governor Christie intriguing, is the fact that he does in many ways defy that box, and also I took, when I first came to the state 2 years ago, he was talking about prison reentry, and I was really struck by it because it seemed to me an issue that goes both left and right. You do have people, we talked about this yesterday, Sam Brownback, who's a conservative, promoting this issue, but this is also something that liberals have been talking about for a long time.
And I'd also like to put a plug in for Mary Pat. Because I think, having a family, having a spouse, and she's extraordinary. At Integrity House, we were blessed to have the First Lady come up and spend time with the women outside of the glare of cameras. And so you see a great personal partnership there that's also, I'm sure, a great source of personal strength to him.
Governor McGreevey used the phrase a minute ago of gratuitous rhetorical points to say that the governor did not do that on the same-sex marriage issue. But I think that's a good phrase for what he does do with individuals from time to time, which has gotten him a lot of attention. And I guess
Governor Christie has just done what all of us would like to do, but didn't have the chutzpah to do.
Right. And I guess the question is that an appropriate thing for a governor and potential president to do? Is it a calculated reaction on his part, an uncontrollable reaction? How do you have any sense of how that's going to, I guess particularly to Darryl and Kate, of how that's going to play in the next couple of years?
I think he's got to temper some of that a little bit as a presidential candidate. I don't think you can be chasing a guy down the boardwalk, shouting at him as a presidential candidate.
With your ice cream cone.
Yeah, with your ice cream cone. Somebody said he's got to remember to give the ice cream cone to an aide before he goes after the guy. But no, I don't think he can do that kind of stuff. I think that kind of stuff on the presidential trail won't play as much. One of the things I've said is, his demeanor, this tough guy Jersey stuff, plays now because people expect it from the governor of New Jersey, former prosecutor, and he goes to these places, puts on a great show, and people love him. But when it's, again, viewed through that sphere of presidential candidate, I think it's a little bit different expectation of your president than a guy who would chase another guy down the boardwalk, shouting at him. That said, people love it. It's unbelievable to me that people respond to it the way they do. And so it works for him. Look at the press he's generated, and it's, teachers certainly don't like it, but other people do. And as Governor McGreevey said, some of the stuff he's doing, probably a lot of people would have liked to have done. A lot of governors, a lot of elected officials would like to go after some of their detractors and don't. He's done it, and it's worked. But again, that said, I don't know as a presidential candidate if that plays the same way it does as tough guy governor of New Jersey.
Look, it's his persona. There's no question about it. But he's smart enough to know that it's a different stage when you're on the national level, and that you don't go to another world leader and say, you jackass. You just don't call him that. It's not what people want. It's not what people want to see. So I think you will see that he will temper that. But right now what people like is they like that. They like the fact that they think they're getting an honest answer, somebody who doesn't beat around the bush, somebody who does tell them what they think, and he's a leader. That's also, he's willing to get out there, and that's part of the definition of a leader. You're going to get out there. However, I do think on the national stage, having talked to David Axelrod and a couple of the others, the Democrats are salivating to do precisely what you said, which is to get him out there, stick him with something, and get him to blow up. Because they think that's what will happen, that he will come back at somebody in a way that is personal. It's fine to come back at them and be strong and refuse to accept some of the things that people say, but you don't do it in a personal way. And his response to date has been more personal. You know, you're an idiot, you're whatever the terms are, and that is going to have to moderate, and I think he will, because he knows. He's smart enough to know that while that works in New Jersey, may work in the Northeast, and work from a distance around the country, people looking at it from a distance, it's refreshing, it's new. When you get into a campaign, and if they start to see it on more than an occasional basis, it's going to change things, I think.
But to pick up what Governor Whitman said, I also think that one of the governor's great strengths is authenticity. And in an era of polling and triple polling and nuance, he's authentic. There's not a significant gap between who we think he is and who he is. And we've also been blessed in this nation with strong executives, whether it's Lyndon Baines Johnson and Bill Clinton, who had strong opinions and frankly had tempers. Some would argue justifiably, because whether it was the battle for the 64 Civil Rights Act or critical budget legislation. But I agree with Governor Whitman and what Darryl said, that will be tempered over time. But, you know, this is New Jersey.
I want to ask one more question and then open up to others' questions, but about Senator Cory Booker. Had Booker decided to enter the race for governor about a year ago, or had the Senate election been held yesterday instead of a month ago, would that either of those things have made any difference to what we'd be talking about today?
Would have made a real difference in margin, I think. If Cory Booker had been on the ballot yesterday, it would have brought out voters that would have stayed on the line. They would have come out for Cory and probably stayed on that line. So it would have, Christie was going to win anyway. Right. Yeah. But it would have brought down the margins a bit.
Yeah, I mean, in places where Booker really performed well, Essex and Hudson County, Christie didn't get beaten as badly as you would expect, and I think places like that are where you would have seen that difference. I think he lost Essex County. I don't know, anybody remember what the margin was in Essex, but it wasn't. Booker won it by like 40 points, and I think Christie lost it by 15 or 20. Yeah. So I think you would have seen that difference in the cities, the urban places.
Anyone have questions? Again, if you give your name and make it a short question.
Then I'm on mic 1. Also, anyone from the overflow rooms that does have a question, please line up at the doorway outside of the drawing room, and we have Jennifer on mic 2 for that, Ben. First question?
Yeah, stand up.
Tell us your name and where you're from.
Sounds good. Hi, my name is Joe Cash. I'm from Burlington County, Marlton, New Jersey. Thank you all for coming today. My question is, the great thing about politics that I love is the next day, it's the next race. So in 4 years, who's running for governor? And who?
From among these people?
Jim McGreevey.
Any comeback announcements we want to make today?
I'm throwing this one to Darryl because he has more experience than I do. Okay, so Sweeney, I've already said one.
I mean, you got, obviously you get both parties sort of salivating over this race, but there are some that already stand out. I mean, Steve Sweeney's doing a victory tour today. He's out in the districts that were challenged by Republicans that Democrats were able to keep. He's doing a tour. I mean, I'm going to write the story, and I'm going to say in the story that this is the precursor to a Sweeney for governor campaign. So you've got Steve Sweeney. You've got potentially Steve Fulop in Jersey City. He just won a convincing race as the mayor of Jersey City. Very ambitious guy. Governor McGreevey knows him better than I do, but he's a very ambitious guy, and I could see him jumping into that race for the 2017 governorship. You got potentially Lou Greenwald down in South Jersey, but I don't know that that's going to happen because you would have a Sweeney-Greenwald issue. They're both South Jersey guys. They're both backed by the South Jersey political machine, and this is, I mean, Sweeney's already out there today, so I don't know that happens. Republican side, you've got a bench, but it's names you probably know. Have runs for some offices before. You got Tom Kane Jr.'s out there. You've got Joe Carrillos, who ran for Senate against Bob Menendez last year and got trounced. You've got John Bramnick, who's the Assembly Minority Leader, who has talked a little bit about his future. I mean, maybe a Kim Guadagno. I don't know that that's a realistic candidacy, but you could see that. You also got some conservatives out there, somebody like Mike Doherty, who is a very conservative senator. You could see him in the Senate race next year. You could potentially see him in the governor's race. So, that field is wide open, and there is angling going on today for it. As you said, the next race starts today, so there's already angling. Particularly among Democrats, I think they're just counting the days till they can send Christie packing and take that seat back.
Other thoughts?
Anybody else?
Other
I
questions?
think we'll alternate between this room and that, and so Professor Pomper, I see that you have a question.
Hi, I'm Jerry Pomper. I teach here. My question is for Ms. Zernike. I use your book on the Tea Party in my course, and I wonder, and it's a great book, would you comment on the implications of the elections around the country for the Tea Party nationally?
Well, as you know, since you read my book, I think that, thank you. You're one of very few number of people.
Which can be bought in the back of the screen.
Yes, exactly.
Kate will sign it.
Coincidentally, they're already signed.
Yes, exactly. And then the remainder bin. But anyway, so I think, in the book what I talk about so much is that what the Tea Party did so brilliantly was just organize, like really organize, lobby. I mean, that was what was so striking to me about that book, was that they had figured that out, and they had taken that strategy from Obama. So I think that's what you see in these races, rather than, I don't sort of necessarily look to all of them and say, oh, this is a message about the Tea Party. I mean, I think, again, you know this from the book, one thing about the Tea Party is that it did so brilliantly more in its early years was that people have no idea what the Tea Party stands for. They sort of have this general idea that it means fiscal, I'm a fiscal conservative, and hey, aren't we all? I mean, hey, we shouldn't spend more money than we had, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't know that I look at these races and say that it's a referendum on the Tea Party. I think that Ken Cuccinelli, again, was one of the earliest, the Virginia Tea Party was backing him 4 years ago. I mean, they've really lobbied for him. I think that in Alabama we saw what you would call an establishment or mainstream Republican win. But I don't necessarily think that means the Tea Party goes away. I mean, again, look at all the excitement you have around Ted Cruz and Rand Paul. I mean, these people are still able to drive excitement. So I don't think we're done with the Tea Party yet. I think, again, if people want to take a lesson from the Tea Party, it is that you have to work to win these elections. And it was what I was saying earlier about you sort of wish that you had someone like Steve Lonegan to run against Chris Christie, the Democratic version. I mean, someone who's going to get out there and really make his or her case and argue for a change. And I think, in this case, in the governor's race, the Democrats didn't really do that.
Can I just follow up with a question to Kate? But Kate, do you sense that nationally that Republicans have reached a tipping point insofar as to what they will indulge?
How much they will indulge the Tea Party?
Yeah.
I think yes, to a certain degree, but I think, again, the thing about the Tea Party is that it has changed the conversation. I mean, I joke with this. One of the young organizers profiled in my book ran John Cornyn's campaign, and I was saying to him when he went to work, he was at FreedomWorks, which was Dick Armey's group, and I joked with him when he went to work for John Cornyn. I said, "You're working for John Cornyn? Are you forgetting how you guys railed against John Cornyn when he refused to back Marco Rubio?" And he sort of, ha ha ha. But so I think the fact that Cornyn has taken these people in, I think there's more of a recognition among even mainstream Republicans that they have to speak a certain way. I think where the Tea Party hit its limit and where it will continue to hit its limit is on things like the government shutdown, on raising the debt ceiling. People don't want obstruction. I mean, people who supported Rand Paul in the primary in Kentucky in 2010, they may have wanted obstruction, but I think nationally Republicans know that they don't win with that strategy. And I also think they are again, this is coming back to New Jersey, they're very aware of their need to reach out across demographic groups. And if you look at the Tea Party, it is largely white. It does not include a lot of Hispanics or blacks or women, frankly. It's much more male.
But I think you also see, in response to your point, more of a concerted effort to do what you say Republicans, anybody taking a lesson from the Tea Party needs to do. I mean, that's one of the things behind Olympia Snow's new, they're working with the Main Street Partnership, I guess it's called now. And one of the things that they're focused on is supporting incumbent candidates that the Tea Party is challenging in primaries, because the Tea Party is still out there trying to take out incumbent Republicans who they don't deem are pure enough for them. And so finally, because it used to be the Main Street Partnership was the moderate Republicans in the House and the Senate, and all they focused on was House and Senate races, and they would never challenge an incumbent. Never challenged an incumbent, no matter who that incumbent was, and they rarely played in primaries. They just weren't interested in primaries, even when they were open primaries. They didn't do much. Now they're saying they've reconstituted themselves, and they're standing up and saying, we are going to protect these members, and we are going to be more active in trying to elect more moderate centrists, however you want to describe them. I like to say I'm an Eisenhower Republican, Eisenhower Republicans.
And
that kind of thing.
That is striking because, again, if you look at a race like, say, Dick Lugar in Indiana, I think Dick Lugar really thought he was going to win re-election just by being reasonable, and he would stand in front of these crowds and say, "You get it, don't you?" But no, people didn't get it. The people who were way out on the edge were working much harder to win, and were not just standing around hoping that people would recognize that they were reasonable.
It's interesting, too, in New Jersey, you saw the counter to that with Governor Christie. The day of the shutdown, he comes out with an ad touting bipartisanship. And so there's a recognition on his part, to Kate's point about, or whoever made the point about how far they will let it go. He's obviously seen that calculation and said, all right, I'm going to appeal to the people, as Kate said, who said, all right, well, enough of this. We don't want obstructionists. And he, there's no way that's a coincidence. That day, this commercial goes up, bipartisanship, vote for me. I worked with Democrats. I reached across the aisle. At the same time, there's all this shouting in Washington going on, and this intractability going on in Washington. So to the point that it's changed the conversation, it's changed it that way, too. He's sort of reaching out on something that he thinks will appeal to a different dynamic.
Your point, Darryl, makes me wonder how the Supreme Court in New Jersey issues are going to work out in the next couple of years, because there's been this impasse. It's exactly the same actors returning, and to the extent Christie's on a national stage, if he is seen as compromising with the Democrats, that's may not be to his advantage in Republican primaries. And yet, as Governor Whitman said, it's not in the state's interest to have a Supreme Court that has fewer members than it's supposed to.
They pull up from the lower benches.
Right.
Still being served, but not the way we should be.
Right.
Before we move on, do you want to just take a quick student
Yes,
question?
please. Ian?
Hi, my name is Ian Liberty. I'm a graduate fellow here. I think that the huge margin for Governor Christie highlights a disconnect between sort of priorities and reality. The biggest issue for all Americans is the economy, and New Jersey is lagging in growth, in jobs, in taxes. If the economic trend continues, how does this translate to the national level?
I don't understand your question, Ian.
Sorry.
I understand your both facts, but I don't understand the question.
Do you mean how does this play for Governor Christie?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, okay.
One of the things that you've seen in the polls, at least the statewide polls, is the economy is everybody's biggest issue, right? And New Jersey has high unemployment, high taxes. I mean, that's what people are worried about. They don't blame Christie for it. So you've had, and that's where this margin comes from. You see people say, well, my taxes are high, I'm getting killed on, I'm out of work, whatever. And everybody identifies with that, but they don't blame the guy in charge. And so he wins with 22% of the margin. I don't see that issue. Barbara Bono didn't do a great job of tagging him with it. She just didn't. And going back to motor vehicle insurance. I mean, that should have been every word out of, I'm sorry. It should have been every word. I've used that analogy 150 times in this campaign. But that should have been every word out of her mouth, and she didn't do it. But I don't know how effective it would have been, because it doesn't stick to them. And so I think you continue to see that as it goes forward. It just doesn't stick. It's not it's not an issue. People say, Christie's done nothing about unemployment. I can't vote for that guy.
Well, I think it also will depend on how the Republicans respond to the next round. Don't forget, we're heading into the holiday season. We're heading into the next potential shutdown, because we have a deficit, we have a spending, we have all these things looming over us, coming at us. And if the group in Washington is brainless enough to have another shutdown, I think Christie then, again, it's not his fault. Right. What happens with the economy is not going to be his fault. If they Well, I've already said there's going to be no grand bargain, which is disappointing. But if Washington can come up with some kind of a solution that lasts for a little while, that convinces people that yes, the economy is coming back, we see more stability in the stock market, housing prices continue to go down, and people can start to afford to get homes, then they're going to start, because certainly the Democrats are going to look at unemployment. They're going to look at what's happening to the economy of the state of New Jersey, put a lot of emphasis on that, and then it might start to stick. But I think a lot of that will be determined by what Washington does.
But I'd also like to, this is a very different position for me, being a apologist for the administration, but it just, to pick up on what Governor Whitman said, is not only the national atmospherics, but, and I see Diane McGreevey and Kathy Karate here probably know more about state government than I will in 2 lifetimes. But I think the governor is actually doing, well, the Commissioner of Labor, Workforce Investment, they're doing some really good things. And sort of I'm on the ground working with underemployed and unemployed women. They're completely redesigning the silos of how we've traditionally approached training. Historically, we've approached training as people participate in training, and whether at the end of the day they actually get a job or not is almost irrelevant. And frankly, that's happened through Democratic and Republican administrations. This administration is wholly focused on connecting training to jobs, which I think is critically important. There are some really good things going on in terms of reentry, in terms of addiction services, sober housing, reconfiguring welfare. I mean, these changes don't happen quickly, but there's some good government work that's taking place that's going to provide, I suspect, systemic change over the long term, particularly for the traditionally underemployed. And it's not sexy stuff, but it's important to make sure that we're training people to actual jobs. I mean, maybe it's common sense. As an old man said to me, common sense, it's not so common. But I think that the administration is trying to make some sensible, pragmatic changes in the governance and the execution of workforce development, which I think is important.
Hi, Ruth Mandel. One comment and one question. Everybody's talking about the governor and very much focus on, quite justifiably, his incredible skill and personality and all the things everyone has already said and people are commenting on day and night on television. I also want to say that in terms of the future of him going forward, he has something that, it was mentioned a couple of times last night, but I see it all the time, partly because of a course that we have here that's co-taught by Maggie Moran, a brilliant person on the Democratic side, and Mike Duhame, his chief strategist. What he has that is so essential for an aspiring presidential candidate, in addition to the personality and all the other things, he has a group of incredibly smart, loyal, devoted people who have been working with, it's not as if he's going to have to put out an ad and say, oh, I think I need to put, send someone in from the Midwest and somewhere else and put a team together, and then I have to get used to them. And we all know how that can become in a campaign, gubernatorial, presidential, whatever. It can become disastrous. These people know him well, and they are smart. I am constantly astounded because I watch this all the time in this course, and he talks about the importance of loyalty, and I think that he values it tremendously, and I also think if you're loyal, you better not be with him. But it's a choice. Nobody is constrained. So I just want to acknowledge that. It was acknowledged on television last night, but people see him individually. He's not alone in this. Then I want to ask a question. It's not a question anyone really wants to dwell on, but I just keep hearing everyone talk about the campaign. He was expected to win from day one. Everyone says the party abandoned the candidate. No one wanted to run. She decided she wanted it, and they abandoned her. But then there's the opportunity. There is the candidate. There is the individual. And no one talks about Barbara Buono. She was, 20 years in the state legislature, held leadership positions, So what was it? And I don't believe it's just that she didn't find the one message to repeat over and over. From your perspective, looking at this election, what made her such a weak candidate? Why didn't some people in the party turn around? Were they all scared of him? What does it have to do with her? I just want some analysis of the other major candidate in this race.
This isn't an answer, but since there's a moment of silence, I'll put it in. It was occurring to me last night watching her that she was a little like Howard Dean in the 2004 presidential race, that had there been other candidates, she wouldn't have won the primary, and maybe she would have done well enough to be a credible candidate 4 years from now. But there wasn't a testing of her before she was suddenly the nominee. But
yeah, I mean, that's a good point, too. You know, take that a step further. She just thrust into the general campaign from day one. I mean, she was the nominee, and she, as you were just saying about Christie, he had his staff around him. She did have to put out ads and go out and get people, and she hired people from out of state who, you know, quite honestly, she didn't know. We in the press didn't know, and, you know, that's a tough road when suddenly there's no trial by fire. You're just thrown in, and now suddenly she's expected to run a general campaign. But you know, going back to the messaging, I mean, what I've answered that question a lot of times in this cycle. I don't know if you can tell me what she necessarily stood for as a candidate, and I think that was a big problem for her. I don't see that she had a cogent message that she put out. She made some bad decisions early on, I believe, in this fight she picked with the party back in May, which, you know, the Democratic Party spent the month of May and I believe part of June fighting with each other, and not a word was mentioned about Christie during that time. That's not all her fault, but she has to accept some of the blame for that. So, you know, there were some bad decisions along the way, and then again, I don't know that she necessarily had a message that we could grab onto and say, yes, she's for this. We knew she was against Christie. We knew she wasn't Christie. She wasn't running for president. We knew all that, but I personally, and I covered a lot of events and covered a lot of the campaign, don't necessarily know what she stood for as a candidate.
Well, I also think, I think when I was driving down here, I was listening to something on the radio about the lucky breaks that Bill de Blasio got, and I think in many ways Barbara Warner had a bunch of unlucky strikes against her. You know, I think she was running against this hugely popular Republican who everyone thought was going to win from the beginning, and so there was sort of, even on the part of the press, I think there was sort of, well, why should we waste writing about her? She's not going to win. I hate to say it, but it does start out that way. I do think she made some bad decisions, but I also think voters want to believe that you want something. Yep. And I don't think that she was doing enough events. I don't think she was just out there. Again, it was, Steve Lonigan inviting people to his front porch. Come talk to me, come ask me questions. You need to be hungry. You can make it a race. And there was I think she was a certain amount of sitting back and waiting for it to become a race. But I really hope we won't finish this question without addressing the issue of gender, which I haven't sorted out yet. But I wonder maybe if Governor Whitman can raise this. I will throw out something that someone here said to me, which was, Barbara Warner campaigned as an outsider, and that's fine, but when you campaign as an outsider, you still have to have your own team. You have to bring in people who are loyal to you. And she maybe didn't do that, and someone raised the better example of Governor Whitman, who again campaigned from the outside, but also built her own team as she worked her way toward running for governor. So I don't know if you want to.
Well, given that you haven't been covering New Jersey, I understand that you don't have the institutional knowledge. In 1990, I was the Republican designee to run against Bill Bradley. And Bill Bradley at that time was going to be the next Democrat presidential candidate. And he had some $12 million in the bank. I had less than $1 million. The Republican Party did not support me. But because of mistakes that Bradley made, I was able to make it a competitive race. Mm-hmm. Chris Christie didn't make those mistakes. Then he had a little thing called Hurricane Sandy, which completely blew everything out. You had the government shutdown during the campaign, so that Barbara Buono trying to get attention was like shouting in a hurricane, to use a Sandy example.
And the special election as well for Senate.
And the special election for Senate. But let's go back to the beginning, too. By not having a primary, she didn't have the opportunity to define herself, and Chris Christie had the money and the focus he defined her for her. Right. And she was always coming from behind then, struggling to redefine herself, to get the attention. Then all these other things happened, so she couldn't get attention whether she'd had the money or not. She never had the money, but you can be competitive even at a 12-to-1 advantage, which is what Bradley had over me. But he made the mistakes. And, you know, my message with him had nothing to do with the United States Senate, but it was good for me.
I just want to reinforce what Governor Whitman said. I think that's a very pressing point, that the primary gives one an opportunity to sharpen a message, to begin to build a strong base, and frankly, it would have, as you said, it would have required the press to focus upon the primary. And the fact that there wasn't a primary just inured to the benefit of the incumbent.
Mm-hmm. And just to your gender question, I think I was asked to run against Bradley as a way for the Republicans to say, see, we do support Republican women running for higher office. Sayonara, see you. Because the woman they'd put up before, 6 years before, had lost by 16 percentage points, and she was kind of gone as a viable player. To a certain extent, I think the Democrats said, let's put up a woman, see how a woman can do against Christie. We don't really expect to win this, and we can see whether we can eat into women's margins at all. But, you know, it's a woman, and so we're showing how we will nominate women for these important jobs, and we're comfortable with them in these important jobs, but phew, we know she's not going to win.
But what about her complaint that politics, and perhaps Democratic politics, but I think in general, is a boys' club in New Jersey? Is that true? Is it fair? Did it hurt her?
Oh, it has been. It is in most states. I mean, you know, it takes time for this to change. I don't think either party, frankly, does the job it should do in promoting and encouraging and giving the women the support they need. It's one thing to say, fine, run for this office, but you can't do that and then say, have fun. You've got to say, we're going to provide you, we're going to be there to help you, we're going to support you, we're going to help you put your team together and help you raise money and, you know, tell you what you need to do kind of thing. You can't just walk away.
There is, and I, having covered this race, and I would not have said it going in, but I definitely think there was some gender issue with this from the Democratic standpoint. You know, you've got a bunch of guys running this party from the Democratic side. Now, there were some personal issues with Barbara ahead of time. I mean, Steve Sweeney and Barbara Buono did not get along ahead of this race. So, but, you know, my wife works in business, and I always kind of joke with her, you know, guys who are go-getters in the business world are hard-nosed, women are shrill, you know, and it's the same message in politics. I mean, a guy like Christie can do what he does, and he's, you know, he's tough, he's a hard-nosed. You see Barbara Buono chasing a guy down the boardwalk screaming, do you think that message is going to play? No way. And that's, you know, it's a reality. I mean, I think Governor Whitman said it always has been. You know, I'm a guy, so I don't necessarily see that, but having covered this race, I did see it. And in talking to the people I talked to and hearing the way they described Senator Buono.
A nice lady.
That kind, but even the people who didn't like her, the things they said about her were not something you would say about a guy you didn't like. And it's hard to make that distinction. But, you know, I go back to the thing in business. It's either, you know, you're hard-nosed, you're tough, you're a Jersey tough guy, or you're shrill, or hysterical, or one of, you know, whatever.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, you know, 50% of the population, it's either party is engaging in a fool's errand if they don't understand the importance of investing in the next generation of women leaders. So.
And I just add that in the half hour ago or so when Darryl listed potential gubernatorial candidates 4 years from now, Kim Guadagno sort of got a postscript, but other than that, they were white men. And they were for both parties.
Absolutely.
Up here in the front, here I come.
Hi, Leonard, I'm a graduate fellow. Despite winning his historic victory, I think exit polls showed that Christie would lose by 7 points to Hillary Clinton. What do you think that means going into 2014 for the Clinton campaign, well, the possible Clinton campaign, the possible Christie campaign looking forward?
I saw a poll that had him ahead.
No, the exit polls, the Edison exit poll, the network exit polls had...
No, but earlier polls against Hillary Clinton. I saw an earlier poll.
This was among voters in New Jersey,
okay.
Which is obviously very different. But in New Jersey, it was 49% Hillary Clinton. 50% of New Jersey voters thought Chris Christie should run for governor, but then when you asked...
For president, I mean.
For president, thank you. When you asked what about if Hillary Clinton were in the race, Hillary Clinton got 49%, Chris Christie got 43%.
But I'd seen a poll earlier, you know, taken a while ago nationally, that said that he was actually competitive and could beat her by a point or two. You know, they're all in flux now, and who knows? It'd be a fascinating campaign to have. I'd be very interested in that. I'm not sure that Hillary Clinton's actually going to take the step at the end of the day, but it would be interesting.
You know, in the end, it's a blue state too. You know, you've got
Yeah.
730,000 more Democratic voters than Republican voters in the state. So I think that's just indicative of that. Hillary Clinton's she's popular. So I'm not sure there's a greater message to take away from that poll. Maybe one of you guys can, you know, if Christie runs for office, does that put New Jersey in play on the presidential race? I'm not necessarily sure it does.
But for the sake of the nation, I think all Americans should want two strong, viable candidates.
Right.
And after the aftermath of the shutdown, and you know, it's obviously I'm a partisan Democrat, but you know, you look at Steven Spielberg's Lincoln, and you look at the Republican Party today, and all I can say is, you know, mea culpa. It's just the strength, you know, and when Governor Whitman uses the words Eisenhower Republican, you know, there was a trajectory from World War II through President Nixon that we as a country, you know, created arguably the greatest society in the history of this world in terms of educational opportunity, the strength of the economy, investment in infrastructure, that Republicans and Democrats, there was a unanimity of thought as to a broad general set of directions. And, you know, whether it's blue versus red, the acrimony in terms of media outlets, I think there's a yearning, as Kate said, by many Americans to come to sensible ground. And if Governor Christie is a vehicle for that to be achieved within the Republican Party, God bless him.
Hi, thank you all for your comments this morning. My name is Isaac Woodward. I'm an undergraduate political science major here. My question is about Mitt Romney's recent analysis on some of the morning shows about Governor Christie's chances nationally and his general commentary that seemed to kind of second some of what you guys were saying here about the need for a candidate like Christie for the Republicans to be viable in 2016. So I was wondering if you guys could comment on that, whether you agree or disagree.
I think I agree. I'm not sure how much Mitt Romney's really, how much people are really listening to Mitt Romney. I think he's still, I think there's still sort of I think what hurt him in the election last year was that he was not seen as authentic, and I still think that's going to dog him. So I don't know that he's really a voice that a lot of Republicans are going to listen to.
You know, there's this battle right now for the soul of the Republican Party we keep talking about, and it's the conservative wing versus the moderate wing. And you know, where do you go? Conservatives all say, well, look, we tried it with Romney, and look what happened. Let's go with Ted Cruz or somebody along those lines, see where that gets us. You know, and it's tough. I mean, a guy like Christie has to navigate that right wing of the party for the primary, and Romney faced this, you know, and then you tack back to the center in order to run in the general. It's a tough road for a Republican. So, yeah, I mean, in theory, it'd be great. Everybody should compromise and get along, but, you know, we all talk about this intractability of the Tea Party in Washington, but in part their mandate is let's not let anything go through. Mm-hmm. I mean, in part their mandate is obstructionism. So, you know, you've got to navigate, if you're a candidate, you've got to navigate that. It's you know, it's sort of easy to say we should get a moderate in there and get along with everybody, but that's not what a lot of people in this country want, is to get along with everybody. There is a wing of the party who doesn't think we should be getting along. Both parties. I mean, I shouldn't just pin it on one. Except again, where the Tea Party falters is, you know, again, the Tea Party was tremendously popular in the election of 2010, but then the next year when it came to the debt ceiling, people really ran away from the Tea Party. Yeah. Voters really ran away from the Tea Party because they did not like the obstructionism. So I think there's one wing of the party that wants that, but if you look at what American voters overall want, and independents are increasingly powerful, what they want is functionality.
And the problem is until we start changing some of our primary rules, we're not going to hear from the independent vote.
Right.
And because if you look at how the demographics are going or how the registrations are going, it's both parties that are losing, and it's the independent or the unregistered voter that, or the non-registered, non-partisan voter who is coming up. Well, that's great, but there's 35 states in this country where you can't vote if you're an independent, registered independent, or there are states like New Jersey, another 6 like New Jersey, where you have to declare your party a month ahead of the election, and most people don't know that and they don't bother to do it. So that means you leave the primary process. The average voter turnout nationwide, and many people here have heard me say this, at 10%. So you leave, those are the most partisan people, and they tend to be the ones with single agenda and often extreme in their views as to what should happen. So you leave that critical first decision to the wings of the party that are probably least representative of the people that you need in a general election in order to win, because the majority of this country, and who was it? There was some great poll released with some fanfare a week or two ago that said that they'd done a study and majority of Americans are in the middle. I want to say, hello, yeah, that's where they've always been. This didn't take a lot of money for a study to be done. But that's where you're really running into your problem until we change some of that.
I mean, part of the analysis of, and again, it's a long way away, but part of the analysis that's already been done about the Republican presidential primary is Christie's path to victory is to be the moderate while Rubio and Cruz and Rand Paul beat each other up for the conservative vote. And when you look at that as the analysis that, they have to split this wing of the party that will come out and vote in order for Christie to get in there, that's exactly illustrative of what you're saying, in that you don't get that center moderate vote so much in the primary. So those guys all have to beat each other up, and then Christie kind of squeaks in. So.
Well, don't forget, too, in the last election, Mitt Romney, as badly as he lost, still got approximately 4 million more of the self-identified Christian conservative right-to-life voters than John McCain had gotten, who had gotten over 2 million more than George Bush had gotten. So the base came out. They got the base, and he got his head handed to him. So the message should, at some point, the penny should drop at some point to say you got to have more than just this narrow base to win nationally.
Time for just a couple more questions, Brian.
Thank you very much, John. Ryan Peen, Eagleton undergraduate associate, class of 2005. It's really good to be back here at Political Science Fantasy Camp. My question is for Governor Whitman specifically, and you were very much involved in the Bush campaign in 2000. And Governor Christie, to me, seems like he's kind of a hybrid between Bush in 2000, establishment, will have a lot of money if he decides to run for president, following the Bush playbook of RGA, using building relationships with people like Corbett, people like Kasich, people like Susanna Martinez. And then he has the tendencies of McCain, where McCain kind of shocked a lot of the establishment types of, on the Straight Talk Express, New Hampshire town hall meetings, which we see throughout the New Jersey municipalities here. Can you be the candidate of the establishment and have those straight talk tendencies, which really propelled McCain as the anti-establishment candidate?
Well, we're going to see that. I would say yes. I would say absolutely, because if people finally decide that they want to win a general election, if you just want a pure candidate and you don't care whether you win or lose, then that's going to be very difficult to do, to meld those two things together in a successful way to get through the primary process as we have it today. If you want to stand back and say, we really want to be competitive at the federal level, it'd be nice to be able to win this, then I think yes. And that's a kind of combination that people are looking for. Someone who is reasonable but strong, who can ensure that they care about me. As Governor McGreevey says, Governor Christie has he cares deeply about people, and he has a way of expressing it that comes across well. He also has a way of expressing when he doesn't care deeply about people. And actually, most people are like that, and they kind of like it in him. And I think it's a kind of combination that could be very successful, but it's getting through the primary stage before we'll know whether that will work.
Who has a perfect closing question?
Make it perfect.
A lot of pressure. Campaign day and night.
The director of the Eagleton Institute and you folks addressed one issue that's very important. I had an inside view of this campaign. Why would a 75-year-old independent spend 7 days a week, 2 hours a day, campaigning for the Republican National Committee in the Middlesex County office? And when I met the governor 2 weeks ago, among a group of volunteers where he spent an hour, what you addressed, the governor relates very well to people. But there's one thing that has not been addressed here. I've been a resident of Middlesex County for 30 years. I'm 75. 55 years ago, I heard a young man speak at the Hollywood Bowl, John F. Kennedy. I went back to the Bronx and campaigned for him. I campaigned for John Lindsay, the Republican liberal in New York City for mayor. Why am I campaigning for Governor Christie and his team? And the reason the team lost. I'm against the Middlesex County Democratic machine, which goes back to the days of David Wilentz. And most of the Democratic candidates who have run for governor come out of that Democratic machine or the machine of Frank Hague in Hudson County.
Do you have a question?
The question I have is a very simple question. Why did they put up, Barbara Boner was supposed to be not the candidate, somebody else. Why didn't they put up a strong candidate?
That question's sort of been addressed, but
Well, look, there were a bunch of people who didn't want to run for, who wanted to run for governor and didn't think this was the right time to do it, and sort of a bunch of Democrats, and I think they sort of closed their eyes and said, okay, let's just get this over with, and I can run next time when he goes to run for president. I think they thought that even if they could raise the money, Governor Christie would have big money coming in from across the country, and it was a fool's errand. And I think that's.
You had Hurricane Sandy too, which a month later, his approval numbers were in the 60s, and you had one at 70. So you had all these people making their decision in November 1 year ago, do I want to challenge this guy? And then you've got polls coming out showing them that's almost 3 out of 4 people are saying this guy's doing a good job. So, that was the...
As to the Hague machine, all I could do is paraphrase Governor Byrne that he looks forward to being buried in Hudson County so he can stay active in Democratic politics.
Exactly.
What did you say?
One
continue
other
voting,
point
right.
about that is I think it only happens every 20 years in New Jersey that both houses of the legislature and the governor are up at the same time. So any legislator who wanted to run for governor this year had to give up their seat to do it.
that's good.
And that excluded a lot of people. But, well, thank you to the panel, and thank you all for being here.
Nice to meet you.